Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Old, New, and Now, playing your time machine through the world of movies. I'm, of course, your host, Will Robinson Smith. So good to have you with me today. And, of course, this is the weekend of Avengers Infinity War. So excited to talk to you about that. And, you know, it's been a decade in the making just to get to hear from Iron Man all the way through up until this point. And I figured, why not do a top 10 video running down some of my favorite films of the MCU, some of the ones that I think are the cream of the crop, the best that got us to this point. But, you know, for something this monumentous and impactful, I figured, you know, it probably shouldn't just be me. I wanted to bring in another voice, someone who's been with me on this entire decade-long journey, and so I could think of no one better than the voice of this channel, my favorite person, my brother, Isaac Robinson Smith. Thanks so much for joining me again, Isaac. Glad to have you aboard for what I think is going to be a really fun top 10 video. Obviously, you're a big Marvel fan. I'm a big Marvel fan.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a fun list to put together.
Yeah, this is really fun. I hadn't really seen I haven't seen some of these movies in quite some time, so it was just cool to kind of put it together all in one cohesive place because I feel like it's just been, I mean, it's 10 years. It's a huge span of time to think about one consistent cinematic story, which I don't know if it's ever really been done before like this. I think TV maybe, but never. I haven't thought about a movie universe taking up this much time. Maybe other than like Star Wars, I think is the only other one I can think of.
Even with Star Wars, I mean, there was, you know, obviously the original trilogy, then they had a big break, and then they had the prequels, and then there was another big break, and then we have, you know, the new films that are coming out now, and obviously now it's just one after another after another. Now it's the Star Wars, like, juggernaut machine, but we're not here to talk about Star Wars. Let's talk about Marvel, because like you said, it's been a decade, 18 movies.
Yeah.
I mean, just the vision of Kevin Feige and, you know, Jon Favreau, Marvel before it was Marvel in its own independent right, coming out with that first Iron Man, taking that bold step with a character that was really unknown at that point in time. I mean, obviously comic book fans knew about Iron Man, you and I did.
I know.
But, you know, for the general public, it was a big risk doing something like that, especially with an actor like Robert Downey Jr., who was kind of on the rocks with his career. So let's start with, before we get to the official top 10,
okay.
Obviously, you know, with 18 films, 8 couldn't make the cut. And so you had your honorable mention, I had my honorable mention. Let's start with yours first.
Okay.
What was the one film that just couldn't quite crack the top 10, but you feel like still deserves a shout out?
Well, this might be the unpopular choice, but I really liked Ant-Man quite a bit, and that was my honorable mention. I really liked, I think, number one, the humor in it. I think Paul Rudd is fantastic at pulling that off, especially in a situation where he has to play a superhero and he has to be this. I think anytime that someone has a lot of power thrust upon them and they don't know what to do with it is going to be funny anyway, so I think that he did it in a really... I think a really nice and a really charming way, too. Like, I really liked his character from the beginning, kind of starting off as a small-town criminal to then having to become a big-time superhero was an interesting transition to watch. Also, of course, you have a pretty big acting titan like Michael Douglas in there, which is really fun to see him on the screen. I really liked what they did playing with the visuals of the movie. Obviously, they had to do that because he is someone that can shrink down to an extremely small size. So I'm someone that's a huge fan of magic tricks and illusions. So seeing the different ways that they would create a world that was much larger than life so that it could look like Ant-Man was very small. I think they did it practically and with CGI, but I just thought it was really clever how it was done. I gotta say that a huge throwback moment for me, especially is, I mean, you and me both know this, but seeing Thomas the Tank Engine come across the screen as this giant behemoth of a vehicle to crash into them and then zoom out and see it was just a tiny plastic toy. Just stuff like that was hilarious to me. So I love the story. I love the characters. I liked the introduction of the character, and I liked that it was something that I didn't know anything about, like, at all. That was cool to me because it was something that they didn't... Maybe, I don't know if they really thought he would not work, but I think a lot of people went into it thinking, well, it's kind of this super throwaway character that no one really knows anything about, and turns out to be a great, really fun movie to watch.
And Ant-Man, if I remember correctly, was one of the original Avengers in the comic book series. So, you know, I think it was nice that they were finally able to work that into the MCU. I mean, obviously, Edgar Wright was originally attached to the movie way before, you know, we ever actually got Ant-Man, and then things didn't work out. We got Peyton Reed jumped in the director's chair. It gave us a really good final product. And I don't think it's an unpopular choice. I think, you know, he wouldn't have the staying power that he does now, especially in Civil War. I imagine probably I don't know if he's going to be in Infinity War. We haven't seen him in any of the
haven't seen
advertisement, but he's getting a sequel this summer, so lots to love about Ant-Man. And for me, my honorable mention was the original Kenneth Branagh directed Thor. We'd had a very grounded MCU up until that point, well, relatively speaking, obviously with Iron Man and the Hulk, both creatures and creations of science, both in their own right. And then here we went to the leap of going into the world of magic and just introducing that element of the MCU. Well, what we consider magic, they consider science. So it was still sort of in the same pocket, in the same realm. And then also just having our main character, immediately stripped away of his powers and being thrust into the real world, having to deal with that and sort of finding the hero without the glamour of the heroics that surround him by having the thunder powers and lightning and Mjolnir and all that good stuff. So I thought it was a nice sort of pull back of what Thor can be to introduce us to what Chris Hemsworth could bring to the character. So those are a couple reasons why I thought that Thor deserved a little bit of a nod. So with all that, go ahead.
I was going to say, I can't really explain what it is, but it definitely had a sort of, because Kenneth Branagh is known for his Shakespeare, it definitely had kind of that feel to it. I can't explain why, but I really liked whatever he put into it to make it feel like that style. It was neat because it had a very classic god kind of story to it, story about and take any Greek legend or Greek story, Greek trilogy, it just kind of had that grandiose feel about it, which I really liked about the movie too. So I think it's good.
We've gotten our honorable mentions on the table.
Yeah.
Let's jump into the main event. So, number 10, starting off at the bottom of our list, we have Iron Man 3.
Yeah.
We debated a little bit about this one. Ant-Man almost made a play for the 10 spot, but the reason I think that we settled on Iron Man 3 for number 10 is just because by this point we'd had 2 films with Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. We'd seen the grand spectacle of the Avengers, and now we have the immediate aftermath of that. You're looking at a guy who is among a super soldier, assassins, a monster, a god essentially to him, and now you just have a man who's brilliant, made himself a suit, and then almost died in space.
Right.
So I thought this was a cool look at what would happen if you took realistically that man, put him in that reality, what would happen to him next? And we saw the sort of darker underbelly of where Tony Stark could go with the alcoholism and hiding behind the spectacle of the Iron Man suit and the house party he has at the beginning of the movie. We don't get a lot of action here. There's not a whole lot of Iron Man in Iron Man 3, but you see Tony going through the journey of sort of rediscovering himself as a hero and just what it means for him to be in this place in his life. What was your takeaway from Iron Man 3?
Yeah, no, I think it was the same thing. I think we got a really humanistic viewpoint of Tony Stark because we hadn't really gotten to see. I mean, we saw a lot of the show that he has, and we saw a little bit of the peek into who he is as a person in Iron Man 2, kind of going back to stuff with his dad and things like that. But I really liked, like you said, how they were able to strip away the suit to see who he really was and how he really operates. I remember the scenes that he had with that kid that he was hanging out with for a while. It was just neat to see Tony Stark be a person instead of using his stature, his money, his technology, all of that to kind of hide what he was about. I really liked seeing that character exploration. Also, I think that it was interesting to really get back to the for lack of a better term, the heart of why he even had the suit to begin with, because he still has the shrapnel in his body, so it has to be pulled away from him. So really, the survival aspect of being Iron Man was sort of revealed a little bit more, I feel like, because he has to have that thing in his chest to survive.
Wasn't Iron Man 3 though when he is able to get the shrapnel out of his heart, and that's he doesn't. That was part of why he was sort of almost able to walk away from.
You're right.
Am I misremembering that?
No, I think you're correct in that. So I guess it was. I guess it was more of seeing, again, just seeing Iron Man as a character and seeing what the choice that he had, because he could have easily. I think at any point he could easily leave the Avengers if he wanted to and kind of operate on his own, but I feel like he knows that he has a higher purpose and he knows that he has to defend something. And he knows that he's got to be part of something bigger than himself. which I think is a good thing.
And we definitely see him struggling with that, by the time we get to Civil War and sort of what it means to, like, what his version of responsibility is versus Cap. But you can probably guess that Civil War might make an appearance later on the list. So we'll save that discussion for that for later. Yeah. Next on the list, number 9, coming in with the mystic arts, we have Doctor Strange, obviously introducing Benedict Cumberbatch into the MCU, Benedict Wong, Chiwetel Ejiofor as Baron Mordo. We just dropped our full review of Doctor Strange a little bit earlier this week, so you can, if you want to see more of a deep dive into our thoughts on that, go check out that video and click the little card above. So we won't spend too much time on this one, but just real quick, Doctor Strange, obviously we both liked it.
Yes. You touched on it a second ago. The mystic part of it is very cool. I think that it's a different kind of power. That's what I love about the Marvel Universe, is all of the different abilities that these superheroes have are so individual to who they are as a person, but also it separates them from each other, and it shows how they each need each other to make things work and accomplish tasks together. Because, like, there's a reason why you would need Doctor Strange's mystic arts, and there's a reason why you would need Spider-Man's webbing. There's a reason why you would need Captain America's wholehearted, all-American decision-making and diplomatic nature. Like, they all fit together for their specific things, but I really like, just pulling again from my love of magic and the mystic arts, it's really cool to see this kind of Inception-y, time-bending ish, weird, dimension-jumping kind of superhero, because that's something that you don't really deal with in any of the other characters. And it was fascinating to me to see where he came from. I really liked that he was a surgeon and he used his hands to delicately heal human lives, and then to see the most essential part of his being ripped away, and to see how he recovers from that was really interesting. And also, it's interesting to see how he kind of has to relearn how to tap into other parts of who he is, because for so long it was his brain and his hands, and that's all he had. But now it's his brain, his will, sometimes his hands, but also just his sense of being is put into check. Plus, that scene at the end where he keeps coming back after he gets killed is just awesome. Where he keeps, that's so good.
The re-killing scene is fantastic.
It's just the coolest.
You and me trapped in this moment endlessly.
Then you will spend eternity dying.
Yeah, visually stunning, great plot device, and speaking of things that are great, one that, was sort of a different turn on the character from the first 2 films we saw. Our number 8 is Thor Ragnarok, which came out. It was the penultimate film before we were getting Infinity War, right before Black Panther. And, this was Taika Waititi jumping into the MCU. Very different flavor. It felt like, if Thor was dipped into the Guardians of the Galaxy juice and then brought back out and said, go do your own thing.
Which I thought
that's pretty much what we got with Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah, I thought, man, it was just funny. It was just really funny. So many places. I loved that. I loved that it had a shift, because I feel like there was some humor pointed at Thor in some of the earlier moments with him or other movies with him, because I think Thor takes himself really seriously. And I think that's where some of the humor lies, is he takes himself so seriously as a god that when that's questioned or when that's kind of twisted a little bit, he's kind of put out of he's kind of put out of sorts a little bit, which is great to watch. I think one moment that's really great in in Ragnarok was when Thor meets up with Doctor Strange, and he keeps being thrown around the house just by being transported, and he's so disoriented that he falls down the stairs and like almost drops his drink. I think it was one of my favorite scenes in the movie. But it was great. Yeah, you're right.
Well, and just jumping off of that point of, Thor has always been the serious character. I think once we actually got Guardians of the Galaxy, I think Dave Bautista's Drax kind of filled that role of like the character who, takes everything very literally and very seriously, and he plays that type of humor well. And so once we had that, we don't really need Thor to necessarily do the same thing. And so I think giving the character at this point in the franchise to Taika Waititi, who can do those really sort of off-the-wall improv type humor that clearly Chris Hemsworth is really good at.
Yeah.
I think that was just a good choice at this point in the Thor franchise, and I think brought a lot of life to it. With the exception of the first one, which, is very different, to what we get now. I think that's why people gravitated toward it so much, is because it felt more like the current level of Marvel humor that we didn't necessarily have back in the original Thor.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, great transition to our number 7 there.
Yes. Speaking of Guardians of the Galaxy,
yes,
the best soundtrack, bar none, of Marvel to date. I don't think it can be beaten.
I have it up here. Yeah, years ago. Yeah. Here it is. There's my Awesome Mix Volume 1. I was so excited.
Yeah, I'm holding up the Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, which is obviously the ride based on the attraction, which is in California Adventure. But yeah, no, this was I mean, for as daring as Marvel had been up until that point, there's no way that, back in 2007, before this began, you could have said, okay, in about 6 years, we're going to have a movie featuring a talking tree and a raccoon as the two of the main leads. Yeah. And it's going to be one of the best movies in the MCU.
Oh, and by the way, that talking tree will be played by one of the biggest stars in Fast and the Furious.
Right.
I'm sure that'll
all
work.
Of 3 words to say.
Yeah.
And somehow creates this really deep character who we, obviously care that he dies, spoiler, by the end of it. Guardians was amazing. What was your takeaway from that movie?
It was like going to a rock concert, I feel like. Like, it was like a Marvel rock concert. I mean, I think mostly that attributes to the soundtrack, which was expertly chosen by the creators as this. I mean, these songs, Hooked on a Feeling and all that, and all those songs from the movie, now I think have a extreme resurgence in popularity solely due to Guardians of the Galaxy. And a resurgence in the popularity of cassette tapes. I don't know. But I really liked...
Well...
I think kind of...
I don't know if we can go quite that far. I think vinyl is probably as far
back
now as we're going to go.
I'm just being optimistic.
That just has sort of a cool retro feel.
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to really take the pencil and start rewinding the cassette tape again?
Yeah. I want to go back.
All right,
I want to go back to the 90s. I really liked it's so cool when you can get an ensemble of characters that are each so different from each other, kind of going back to the Avengers point that I made earlier. But all these characters seemingly would never be in a group together. Just would never work at all. They're each so different. They each have their own ideals. They each kind of are living their own lives, and they kind of get thrust together randomly because of events that happen around them. And it's always fun to see how they figure it out. And it's always fun to see how they mesh together. And going back to the rock concert idea, it was just a really fun movie. It was just a really fun ride, and I loved the light tone that they took with serious situations, like Star-Lord being not concerned for his life in a moment of peril, but being concerned that they got his name wrong. Like, things like that, they're just really fun to see. Yeah. Just
and just speaking of movies that are just really fun, let's jump ahead to our number 6, which obviously is your favorite superhero, bar none.
Woo! Spider-Man.
Quickly became mine after the Incredible Hulk, which I've got my my little Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk team-up comic that is in the background of my set right now. This is Spider-Man: Homecoming, Marvel's take on the old webhead. It was, for me, finally, I mean, I loved Tobey, and I loved The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, but I felt like this really felt like the character that we grew up reading, the character that we saw in the 90s animated series, who, he was a kid who didn't really know what he was doing, but was sort of figuring it out, and he felt quippy. The world they created for him, like, all the supporting cast in this film were spot on for their, they felt like honest, genuine teenagers. They were going for the John Hughes vibe. I think they really nailed it. And you had Michael Keaton, who, came back to finally playing, a superhero villain here after so many years of playing, Batman back in the late 80s. Came back and did Birdman with Alejandro Inarritu, which is sort of like a commentary on that. Now we actually have him as the Vulture, and he's not dead, which means he can come back.
As another Birdman.
Yes.
Which I think is great.
But obviously, Spider-Man special to you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I completely agree with you. Everything about the character was right. He was actually a kid. You know, like I could buy what they were doing with Spider-Man in 2000. I mean, Spider-Man 2002 is still like holds a very special place in my heart because it's why I love Spider-Man. I saw it at the perfect age, and that like it introduced me to comic books in general. But I feel like this current version is the perfect marriage of the dorky, he has no idea what he's doing, teenager, has homework, has problems, has his aunt to worry about, girlfriend problems, friendship problems, all that stuff, and he's a superhero, and so he has to have another side to him that makes him strong in that regard. I think it's the perfect marriage of those two qualities of the character. And it's very hard to please me because I'm someone that loves Spider-Man so much, and he really means a lot as a character to me. And I think they did a great job of marrying those two qualities into a character that works really well. And shout out to, I can't remember his name, and I feel terrible, but shout out to the actor that played his best friend, because that was such a great dynamic to watch. They played off each other really, really beautifully in that movie.
Yeah, no, Spider-Man Homecoming was a fantastic film, and, you know, definitely a worthy rendition of bringing the wet head into the MCU. And the way they did that segue was through our next film, number 5. Whoa, looks like you've been watching this for a little while. It's been that long? Jeez. Okay, so I think now would be a good time to just take a little bit of a break, go get some water, use the bathroom, things like that, and then when you're ready, come on back, click over here for part 2 of our top 10 review, and we'll go ahead and enjoy the rest of it together. So go, stretch your legs, it's good for you. We'll still be here.